It was August 1944. France had just been liberated, and the Allied armies were surging eastward. Victory was in the air, yes, but so too was the scent of exhaustion, of desperation, of fuel running low. You see, the men who stormed the beaches of Normandy now found themselves hundreds of miles from the sea, chasing the Germans with everything they had left. But armies don't march on courage alone. They march on gasoline. And gasoline was running out. Without fuel, tanks became useless steel coffins. Trucks became nothing but roadside statues. Planes grounded. The entire Allied advance, Eisenhower's grand gamble, could grind to a halt. Imagine it. After storming through Normandy, after breaking Hitler's Atlantic Wall, after bleeding on every hedgerow and hill, the greatest army in the world brought to its knees not by German fire, but by an empty fuel tank. That was when the Allies created something audacious, something desperate, something they called the Red Ball Express. Picture it. Thousands of trucks painted with bright red circles, barreling down French roads day and night, convoys stretching for miles, headlights off, engines roaring, men gripping the wheel with white knuckles as they raced to deliver life itself, gasoline, to the front. And here's the truth. Without the Red Ball Express, there would have been no Allied victory in Europe. But behind that legend is another story. A story not just of trucks and fuel, but of the men who drove them. Men who risked everything, not in tanks or bombers, but behind the wheel of a 2.5-ton truck. Men who history nearly forgot. Many of them were African American soldiers serving in segregated units, given the dangerous jobs nobody else wanted. They weren't allowed to fight in most combat roles. But here, on the Red Ball Express, they proved that courage has no color. This is their story. The story of the lifeline of Europe. The story of the Red Ball Express.
The idea was born out of necessity, out of sheer desperation. The Allies had no choice. They needed fuel, ammunition, food, tires, spare parts, everything an army consumes in war, and they needed it delivered across a scarred landscape where railroads had been bombed, bridges blown, and ports destroyed. So they built a highway of trucks. Not a real highway, no, just dusty French roads, cratered and broken, choked with mud and rubble. But for the Allies, these roads became an artery, a lifeline, the Red Ball Express. The name itself came from American railroads, where Red Ball marked priority freight. Cargo that never stopped, never slowed, never waited. That was the promise. That was the mission. Convoys of trucks would run 24 hours a day. Daylight, darkness, rain, dust, doesn't matter. The cargo moved, always. And who were the men chosen to drive these convoys? Nearly 75% were African American soldiers, men assigned to segregated service units. The army wouldn't let them fight on the front lines, but here, they fought a different battle, one just as dangerous. Imagine this. Young men, many barely out of their teens, who had grown up driving tractors, pickup trucks, buses back home in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi. Suddenly, they were behind the wheel of a 2.5-ton GMC deuce and a half, roaring down a narrow French lane with enemy planes overhead, landmines beneath their wheels, and no headlights to guide them.
They weren't just driving, they were gambling with their lives. Convoys stretched as far as the eye could see. Dust clouds rose like storms. Men tied scarves across their mouths, eyes stinging, throats raw. The trucks shook and rattled over broken cobblestones, swayed through sharp bends, lurched up steep hills. And through it all, the engines never stopped. The rules were brutal. Trucks had to keep moving, always moving. No stopping for breakdowns, no pausing for bathroom breaks, no slowing down to check a flat tire. If a truck faltered, it was pushed off the road and left behind. The convoy thundered on. One driver later said, "If you broke down, you just prayed someone would tow you later. Otherwise, you walked." Now, think of the danger. Convoys without headlights, racing through the night. Drivers leaning forward, eyes straining in the darkness, hoping not to smash into the truck ahead. German snipers hunted them. Luftwaffe planes swooped down to strafe the columns. Mines littered the roadsides. And yet they drove. They drove hundreds of miles a day, sometimes 20 hours at a stretch. Some men fell asleep at the wheel, their trucks veering off into ditches, into rivers, into each other. Some never woke again. But without them, Patton's tanks would have run dry. The push into Germany would have stalled. The war might have dragged on for months more. Each truck carried 80 jerry cans of gasoline, precious liquid fire. A single convoy could deliver enough fuel to keep an entire armored division moving. Multiply that by thousands of convoys, and you begin to understand this wasn't just a supply run. This was the beating heart of the Allied advance. One general later said, "The Red Bull Express was the salvation of our armies." And yet, most of the men who drove those trucks never heard the praise. They weren't paraded as heroes. They weren't decorated with medals. They were told, just drive, just keep the wheels turning. But history remembers, and today we remember. When you picture World War II, you might see soldiers storming beaches, parachuting into night skies, or raising flags on mountain tops. But behind every victory, there were wheels turning, dust rising, men gripping a steering wheel, whispering prayers into the darkness. That was the Red Ball Express.
The Germans knew what was happening. They weren't blind to the endless lines of trucks snaking through France, hauling the fuel and ammunition that kept the Allied spearhead alive. To them, the Red Ball Express was a target, a weak link, and they set out to break it. Snipers hid in the tree lines, waiting for headlights, or the faint silhouette of a driver hunched over the wheel. Mines were planted on the shoulders of the road, waiting for a tire to stray a few inches too far. The Luftwaffe sent fighters to strafe the convoys from the air, guns chattering, bullets ripping through steel and flesh alike. But the trucks kept coming. Even when a convoy was hit, even when trucks burst into flame, even when drivers were killed instantly at the wheel, the others did not stop. The Red Ball had one rule: keep moving. Always keep moving. Imagine it, driving through smoke, the wreckage of a truck still burning on the roadside, the body of a fellow driver still inside, and you couldn't stop, couldn't even slow down. You shifted gears, gripped the wheel tighter, and pushed on. Convoys became rolling fortresses. Trucks traveled bumper to bumper, each one depending on the one ahead to stay alive. The dust was so thick, men said you could barely see your own hood. Some drivers tied ropes from the back of one truck to the front of the next, so if visibility vanished, at least the convoy stayed together. There were no headlights at night, none. The glow would draw fire. Instead, drivers followed the faint red glow of cat's eye reflectors nailed to the trucks ahead, tiny glimmers in the dark. One slip, one moment of lost focus, and a truck could crash, flip, or plummet off a bridge. And fatigue. Fatigue was the greatest enemy of all. Drivers worked 20, sometimes 22 hours a day. Some nodded off mid-journey, waking only when their truck veered off the road or when it slammed into the rear of the one ahead. Others never woke at all. One veteran recalled, "You'd see a man nodding off, steering wheel loose in his hands, eyes shut, truck still rolling. We'd honk, we'd yell, but sometimes it was too late." And yet they climbed back in, every day, every night. For many of the African American soldiers, this was the first time they'd been trusted with such responsibility. Back home, society told them they were second class. Even in the army, they were segregated, often given the hardest work, the dirtiest jobs. But on the Red Ball Express, everything depended on them. It didn't matter if you were black or white. If you were behind the wheel, you carried the war on your back, and they knew it. Some painted slogans on their trucks: Hitler's milk wagon, hell on wheels. Others scrawled girlfriends' names or hometowns they prayed to see again. For a few hours, the truck wasn't just a machine, it was theirs. And still the Germans tried. Machine guns, bombs, roadblocks, even ambushes in the dead of night. But for every truck destroyed, 5 more rolled in behind it. For every convoy lost, 10 more thundered down the road the next morning. The Red Ball Express was too big, too relentless, too vital to kill. It was dangerous work, deadly work, but the drivers carried it with grit, humor, and pride. They told jokes over the roar of engines. They swapped stories at roadside stops. They wrote letters home by the light of flickering lanterns, hands trembling from the vibration of the wheel. They were young, most of them so very young. But in those weeks of fire and dust, they were holding up the entire Allied advance. Every jerry can they delivered meant another tank rolled forward. Every crate of ammo meant another battle won. Every meal ration meant another soldier fought one more day. And slowly, mile by mile, convoy by convoy, the Allies pushed deeper into Europe, closer to Germany, closer to victory. All because the Red Ball Express never stopped.
By November of 1944, the Red Ball Express had run its course. The ports of Antwerp and Le Havre were finally open. Supplies could move by ship, by rail, by more permanent routes. The convoys, those roaring lifelines of steel and dust, began to thin. Trucks were reassigned, drivers sent to other units. The endless streams of headlights in the night slowly faded. But in those 3 short months, the Red Ball Express had done the impossible. Over 400,000 tons of supplies delivered, thousands of convoys, millions of gallons of fuel, all rushed to the front at a pace the enemy could not match. Some generals later admitted, with a shrug, that without the Red Ball, Patton's tanks would have sat silent, Montgomery's divisions would have stalled. The whole Allied push across Europe might have collapsed. The Red Ball Express kept the war alive. But here's the cruel irony. The story of the Red Ball Express almost disappeared. For decades after the war, it was little more than a footnote in history books, a line or two about supply convoys. No medals were given, no monuments raised, no parades in their honor.
The drivers, mostly young African-American men, returned home to a country that still saw them as second-class citizens. They risked their lives on the back roads of France, carried the weight of the Allied armies, and yet, when the war ended, they went back to cleaning railroad cars, shining shoes, working fields, facing the same discrimination they had known before. It was as though the Red Ball Express had vanished into the dust it once kicked up.
But history has a way of remembering, even if it takes time. Today, we know the truth. We know that 75% of the drivers were African American soldiers who had been denied combat roles. We know they proved, day after day, convoy after convoy, that courage is not measured by skin color, but by endurance, by sacrifice, by the willingness to drive into the dark knowing you might not come back. They showed that heroism is not only in the charge, the parachute drop, the raising of a flag, but in the steady turning of wheels, the grit of hands on a steering wheel, the refusal to quit. Close your eyes and imagine it. A French road, August 1944. Dust thick as fog, engines growling, dozens of trucks stretching into the horizon, each one stacked with fuel, food, ammunition. Behind every wheel, a young man, tired, dirty, hungry, but unbroken. His hands tight on the wheel, his eyes on the road ahead, his heart pounding with fear and pride. That was the Red Ball Express. Many of the men never spoke about it after the war. Some because they weren't asked, others because they weren't believed. A few wrote letters, memoirs, fragments of memory, enough for us to piece together the picture. But countless stories were lost, countless names buried under time. And so we tell their story now. We speak their names through the thunder of narration, through the turning of pages, through the memories of history. We remind the world that victory in Europe was not won by generals alone, not by plans drawn on maps, not by tanks and planes in isolation. It was won by men behind the wheel of a truck, men who drove through dust, danger, darkness, men who carried the war on their shoulders, mile after mile. It was won by the Red Ball Express. Today, monuments stand in Normandy and across France, honoring those convoys. Museums tell their story. Documentaries revive their voices. Slowly, the world remembers. And as we remember, we see the truth more clearly. The Red Ball Express was not just a supply line. It was a symbol of perseverance, of unity, of courage unrecognized, but never forgotten. The war ended. The convoys stopped. Dear Mama, the nights here are long. I drive with the window down, the air thick with dust. Sometimes I think I can't breathe, but I keep the truck rolling. I know every gallon I carry could mean another day our boys keep pushing forward. Don't worry about me, Mama. I'm doing my duty. That was the kind of letter many of the Red Ball Express drivers sent home. Short, careful. They rarely wrote about the danger, rarely spoke of the fear. But the truth was different. Convoys were ambushed, trucks overturned. Some men didn't come back, and those who did carried the memories in silence. Imagine two drivers parked by the roadside for a stolen moment of rest. The engines ticking hot, the night alive with crickets. One leans against his truck and lights a cigarette. The glow of the match flickers on his face. "Think we'll make it, Joe?" he asks. Joe exhales, smoke curling into the night. "We'll make it. We ain't got no choice." A long silence follows. They both know what waits on the road ahead, but neither speaks it. Instead, they climb back into their cabs, grip the wheel, and drive on. Some of those men returned to lives that barely noticed what they had done. They put away their uniforms, tucked their medals, if they had any, into drawers, and went back to the fields, the factories, the segregated towns they'd left behind. One driver later said, "I could haul fuel through enemy fire, but when I came home, I couldn't sit at a lunch counter." That was the world they returned to. A world not yet ready to honor their sacrifice. But time has a way of bringing justice, even if late. In later years, historians unearthed records, diaries, photographs. Survivors shared their stories. Slowly, the truth spread that the Red Ball Express was not only a military miracle, but a human one. Schools began to teach it, documentaries were filmed, veterans stood before audiences, finally able to say, "We were there, we kept the war alive," and at last people listened. Close your eyes and you can still hear it. The steady rumble of engines on a dark French road, the smell of gasoline and dust, the nervous laughter of young men too tired to be afraid, the endless horizon of headlights moving forward, always forward. That sound, the heartbeat of the Red Ball Express, echoes even now. So remember them. Remember the young man who drove through the night with nothing but faith and grit. Remember the convoys that never stopped, even when the world seemed to. Remember that victory in Europe was written not only in battles, but in miles driven, gallons delivered, risks taken in silence. The Red Ball Express may be gone, but its story is not. It lives in every mile of road, every soldier saved, every victory earned. And as long as we tell it, those engines will never fall silent. And so, that is the story of the Red Ball Express.
A story of trucks and fuel, yes, but more than that, a story of courage, of sacrifice, of men who carried the war mile by mile until victory was possible. Sometimes history remembers the big battles, the famous generals, the grand strategies. But often it's the quiet stories, the ones of grit, determination, and unseen bravery that truly shape the world. The Red Ball Express was one of those stories, and tonight we've kept its engines running a little longer. If this story moved you, if it made you feel the rumble of those engines or the weight of those nights, then I'd love for you to stay with us. Go ahead, tap that like button, share this with someone who loves history, and of course, subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the next journey we take into the forgotten corners of the past. Your support helps keep these stories alive, because as long as we tell them, they'll never fade away. Thank you for listening. This has been the story of the Red Ball Express, and I'll see you in the next story.